Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi, and today we're going to be looking at repairing and restoring these two vintage Kenner Star Wars Stormtroopers. Now both of these were very kindly sent to me by Joel from Canada very recently, and he said as a child he had taken these and covered them in Tipp-Ex because he wanted them to be white again. So you can see that this poor chap here at some point has been covered in Tipp-Ex or whiteout or correction fluid. It's called many things in different countries. In the UK we call it Tipp-Ex. Basically when you're writing and you make a mistake, you use some Tipp-Ex to cross it out and then you could write over it again. Yeah, it's a strange fluid. I'm not quite sure what it's made of, but I used to use it all the time for doing sort of things like this, actually painting onto figures, and I think with luck we should be able to remove it from this figure and make him look quite nice again. You can see the other one is not in quite such bad condition. He's got a bit on his leg and is just a bit dirty. It's this first chap here, you can see, who has really suffered at the hands of the Tipp-Ex. So let's see what we can do to get these up and running again. I think I should be able to make them look quite nice. Worst case is they go into Yellow Squadron, which is my army of Imperial figures, and they don't have to be perfect to go in that, but I actually think that we can make these look really quite nice with not much effort. Now I have been sort of studying these figures to try and work out what it is that's on them. Certainly this is Tipp-Ex. The rest of them I'm not quite sure. You can see it's sort of dirty, but it's also quite sticky, and you can just sort of scratch it away with a finger, so I'm not quite sure what that is. So really the first thing to do with these is just to give them a wash in some hot soapy water. I'm going to use a toothbrush just to try and get into all of the sort of nooks and crannies and get as much out as I can, and we'll just see what comes off using that method. It may be that most of it comes off. I'm not sure with the Tipp-Ex because Tipp-Ex isn't water based. Tipp-Ex is a chemical based thing. I certainly, if you remember back to your school days using Tipp-Ex, it had quite a pungent smell, and that means that it had a solvent in it. So I don't think water will actually remove much of this, but it may get off some of the dirt and grime here. So that's what we're going to try first and see what happens. After a good wash, these figures are not looking too bad. I managed to get a lot of the dirt off, but you can now clearly see where the Tipp-Ex covers most of the arms and the body on this one, and just the leg on this one. It doesn't really shift with the hot water. You can scratch it a bit with your fingernail, but it's quite sticky and quite messy. You can see it leaves residue on your fingers. So the next thing to try is actually lighter fluid. I think this will remove the sort of chemicals of the Tipp-Ex quite nicely. I've got a tin here of lighter fluid. I'm just going to get some of this onto a cotton bud and see what happens. So I'll put a little bit of that on the end. Let's start with the one that's only got one leg covered and see what happens. Oh yeah, that is working exactly how I expected it to. It's taking the Tipp-Ex off quite nicely. You can see that's already cleaned quite a good patch of that. So the process really is going to be lighter fluid onto a cotton bud and work my way around the figure until all of the areas are cleaned, and I think I'll probably give it another wash. You can see there's some dirt underneath, but that is taking off the Tipp-Ex quite nicely, and it won't damage the figure, so this is a good way of doing it. But it's going to be quite time consuming, just judging by how long it's taking to do this. This figure has only got a tiny amount on him. That other figure is completely covered. But yeah, you can see that really does make quite a big difference. It's coming off really quite easily. There's going to be a few areas that are going to be a little bit more awkward just because of the detail and in the moulding of the figure, but it does come off. Yeah, that's not bad at all. You can see there, just a quick sort of go over, that leg is looking better. So let's get both of these figures tidied up, and then we'll see what they look like. And there we go, it's quite a transformation. This was the figure that was absolutely covered in Tipp-Ex, and you can see he now almost looks like a sort of pretty good Stormtrooper. Most of it has come off. There's a few little bits still sort of in some hard to reach places that I might use a knife or something just to try and sort of pick those out, but the overall effect is he's back to looking like a Stormtrooper. You can see there's even some ink on his leg, which you wouldn't have been able to see because it was so covered with Tipp-Ex. But yeah, now he is looking really quite nice. And the other guy, you can see it was just his leg that was dirty, but now that is again looking pretty nice. If this was sort of just for my collection, I would just leave these as is, repaint the hands and the sort of the black bits and stick them into Yellow Squadron. But I think for this video, let's try and make them look as good as new. So at the moment you can see they are a little bit on the yellowed side. They've got a little sort of tinge of yellow. This one's not too bad, a little bit of yellowing on the front, but this one overall is pretty yellow. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop them into some hydrogen peroxide. Now I know some people don't like the de-yellowing process of putting figures in hydrogen peroxide, but for me in this instance it's not going to affect what these figures are. They're already pretty beaten. It would just be nice to get them looking that little bit whiter. And the whitening process, it does work really quite well, but it doesn't last forever. They will slowly go back to being yellow over time. So it may be that some people don't want to do it just because they know that they will turn back to yellow. But let's do it anyway on these figures so you can see what the process is. I have here a glass jar. Into that I'm going to drop the two figures and I'm going to fill it up with some hydrogen peroxide. And today I'm using some 40% hydrogen peroxide. Normally I'd use 6% because that's the stuff that you can get in the sort of local chemists, but I bought this online and 40% was what they had, and it was actually quite cheap, probably cheaper than buying the stuff in the chemist. So I've just bought a whole load of that. So the process is drop the Stormtroopers into the jar, and then I'm going to fill that up with hydrogen peroxide and put it out in the sunshine. Now at the moment it is sort of early spring here in the UK, so the sun's not massively strong, but it will be strong enough to get this process working. It may take a day or so, it depends really how bright the sunshine is, but you know, you just have to sort of keep checking the figures, keep checking back every sort of few hours, see what they look like. If they've gone white enough, take them out, give them a good wash, and then that's the process done. Now while we're waiting for those figures to de-yellow, I have another little project that I can do at the same time, and that is this Ugnaught, which is another one that Joel had sent me along with those two Stormtroopers. And you can see on this guy, he's basically been covered in Bluetak or white tack, basically the sort of thing that you would stick posters onto walls with, and that was done about 40 years ago. So this white tack has gone quite solid and is really sort of pushed into the figure. You can see I can sort of scrape bits of it away. It's all got bits of hair or fur or something in it, I don't know. So we're going to give this guy a bit of a clean up as well. I'm hoping just warming this up in some hot water will loosen most of it, and then the trick for removing what's left is actually to get more Bluetak or more whatever you want to call this sort of tack stuff. This is actually 40-year-old sort of Bluetacky type stuff, because every time I clean up a toy and find some, I stick it into this ball because it's actually quite useful and quite a good way of removing other bits of old sort of Bluetak. You get an old piece of it and you push it on and sort of keep working it around, and it ends up sticking to this stuff that's stuck to the toy and pulls it off. So it's actually quite useful to sort of keep some old bits of this sort of tacky stuff around, and yeah, it does actually work quite sort of nicely. But first off, we're going to give this a wash again, just some hot soapy water, and hopefully that will remove sort of a lot of it, and then I'll get the rest off using this and a cocktail stick or something just to pick it out. I also have another job to do, which is Ugnaught base, which I might as well chuck in with this one, which is I have these two Ugnaughts that were included in a lot from Daniel, who sent over a whole load of his sort of childhood toys that he no longer wanted. And you can see that these poor guys, although in quite good condition, have got blue ink on them. So at some point some blue pen has been sort of put on them, and we're going to remove that as well. But I'm going to give these a wash at the same time as giving this tacky one in the middle a wash, and then we'll try and clean them up fully. And here are the 3 Ugnaughts after a good wash. Most of the tacky stuff came off quite easily, just sort of washing it and scraping it. You can see there's a few little bits left on there, but I was using a cocktail stick to sort of work into the awkward areas and scrape out any sort of final pieces. But as you can see, he's actually not turned out to be a too bad figure. This figure actually does have the plastic mould problem, which I will link to a video that I've talked about it before in. Certain factories used certain mixes of chemicals, and over the years those chemicals are starting to degrade, and you end up with this sort of plastic mould. It looks like spots all over certain parts of the figure, and it depends which factory these came from. Now this figure came from Canada, so whatever factory that was that produced these. I just having a quick look on the back, it says these are from Hong Kong. You can see there's the sort of plastic mould spots on his legs as well. There's nothing you can do to stop this, it is just the plastic degrading over time. We have these other 2 figures though that need a little bit of fixing up. You can see these have blue pen marks on the noses. I think one of them's also got blue pen on his shoes. To remove that, we are going to use spot cream, but it has to be quite specific spot cream because it needs to contain benzyl peroxide. This is 5% benzyl peroxide. You can get some that has 10% in. All you do is you take some of that and you put it onto the areas that have the pen, just a little bit like that, make sure it's covered, and then put it out in the sunshine, and it will dry out. Once it's dried out, sort of wash it off, replace it again, keep doing it until the ink has disappeared. Depending on how sort of old the ink is and how ingrained it is, it will take sort of 5 or 6 goes. Sometimes I've done this about 10 times to remove it, but it does remove it in the end. Just sort of keep applying the stuff, put it in the sunshine, and the UVs in the sunshine will react with the benzyl peroxide and the ink will disappear. And after about 5 applications over a couple of days, here we are with the finished Ugnaughts. As you can see, the blue ink has now pretty much gone from the noses of them. As I say, it takes a few goes to actually get this to work. You basically put benzyl peroxide on, leave it in the sun. As it dries out, wipe it off and then put some new stuff on. This has taken a couple of days with, as I say, about 5 applications, and the noses are looking a whole lot better. I've also taken the time to make a new cape for the one in the middle. As you can see, that now looks really quite nice with a handmade cape on there. I've done a separate video a while back on making capes for Ugnaughts, so I'll link that in the description and also at the end of this video if you want to make your own capes for them. But I've now ended up with 3 pretty good looking Ugnaughts all ready to go back on display. So it's now time to get back to fixing up the Stormtroopers. After about 4 hours in the sun and the hydrogen peroxide, you can see that this is how they have ended up. They are not pristine white, but they're certainly a whole lot better than how they started. I also took the time to try and remove as much of the ink stain as possible on the leg. There you can see there's just a tiny little blue dot left. That's after about 10 applications of the benzyl peroxide spot cream, because it was quite a big deep ink stain. It takes a really long time. I could probably do a few more and I might be able to get the final bits of that out, but in this instance I think that is good enough. And as you can see, they're pretty good looking Stormtroopers. The final thing though I need to do is just to touch up the paint on them. These have had quite a lot of wear, so you can see there's most of the black paint is missing off the hands. This one that was covered in the most Tipp-Ex still has a little bit of Tipp-Ex just in his sort of mouth vent there, so if I paint that you won't be able to see any of that sort of white residue that's left. On this one as well, I didn't bother removing the name sort of that has been drawn on the feet, because I really quite like that on these vintage figures. So you can see here there is Joel's initials on the bottom of that one. The other doesn't have anything, I don't think. Oh no, it does have a sort of slightly sort of faded bit of text. So you can't actually read what that says, so I'm going to leave those as is, but let's get the paint sort of redone on them. For that I'm using again Vallejo model paint. This is a 70.950 black. This is a matte black, so I'll paint that on. Once that has dried, I will then put this satin varnish over the top, and that will give the same sort of finish that the original figures had. And I'm going to be using a couple of different brushes. I've got quite a fine brush here for applying it, and I also have a pin here that I've put into an old paintbrush handle, which is very good for applying very small amounts of paint for things like the little sort of dots on either side of his face there. So those are the 2 brushes that I'm going to be using. But let's get on and just get these painted. And here are the two finished figures. As you can see, they are looking really quite nice. A massive difference to how they started and how they arrived here, all covered in Tipp-Ex and dirt and various bits of grime, with a lot of cleaning and a little bit of ink removal. We've now ended up with two very displayable figures that I will be proud to put into Yellow Squadron. As you can see, it's a reasonable amount of work to save these figures, but it's always worth doing, because I think most people would see those Stormtroopers and just think they were beyond repair. But with a little bit of work and a little bit of effort, you can end up with two figures that look like this. Now, I know the de-yellowing is not something that some people like to do, but in this instance I thought it was good to sort of show the whole process. And as you can see, the guy on the left is still a little bit yellowed, but he's still a very displayable figure. Now, I do need to say a massive thank you to both Joel and Daniel, who supplied all of the figures that you've seen that worked on in this project. If you've enjoyed this video, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.